not connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, your destiny, life, karma, whatever. I just thought it was an apt quote to set the scene, as today's theme is leadership in business. And having spoken to our two guests over the last couple of days, I actually couldn't think of two more interesting stories to kick off the series and hopefully help us all join our dots better. So first off, let me introduce you to Ted Webb. Ted is, as David said, CEO of IBA Corporate Finance, a native of Ballyhonus in County Mayo, but now exiled in South Dublin. A graduate of both St. Jarlath's in Tuam and UCD, Ted trained as an accountant with KPMG in Dublin before moving with the company to Canada, where he spent 5 years and rose to the rank of director with KPMG. Became a Canadian citizen and probably most importantly, met his wife, Orla. The family moved to London in 1991, and while based there, Ted joined Fifes as the company's acquisition manager. In 1996, he joined IBI, advising a host of public companies and high net worth individuals in Ireland. In September of 2017, Ted was part of the IBI management team that bought the business from Bank of Ireland. He's a father of 4 children and is an avid sports fan, follows Mayo footballers, Man United, Irish football and rugby, and his exiled club of Coola in Docky. Our next guest is Richard Chambers. A native of Newport, Richard's family has for generations been at the coalface of commerce in the county. Richard himself is named after his grandfather, R.G. Brown, a well-known Westport businessman and renowned mathematician. After graduating for St. Jarlath's College in Tuam, similar to Ted, Richard earned a Bachelor of Science in Financial Mathematics and Economics in NUIG and a Master's from Warwick Business School in 2006. Richard's first appointment was as Director of Short-Term and Interest Rates Derivatives Trading with BNP Paribas Bank in London and then on to New York. He co-founded sports exchanging trade firm Bua Book in 2012. And in 2013, he joined Blue Crest Capital Management as a portfolio manager in New York. Richard joined Goldman Sachs in New York in 2015 before being appointed MD of Interest Rate Derivatives Trading in 2017. In November of last year, he was named partner, joining the elite 1% of Goldman Sachs, who form part of the leadership group at the bank. Richard lives in Manhattan, where he's joining us from this morning with his wife, Lindsay, and their 3 young children. You're very welcome, Richard and Ted, and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett.
So I'm just going to begin by going back into your early life and growing up in Mayo. I'll maybe kick off with you, Ted. Let's tell us a little bit about early life, your interests outside of business, and as you were growing up, those influential people you met and influences in your life.
Thanks, Garrett, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about IBI myself and really hoping to work with Spot into the future. So Ballyhonus, a fantastic market town. I was one of 9 kids, second eldest boy. Fantastic dad and mum. My dad was a cattle dealer. He was one of 21, so he was a man who knew how to get out to work, as Leo Varadkar says. He was the man getting up early in the morning from a very early age. So we were always aware of work. We were always aware of the effort it took to, I suppose, to keep a family on the go. We were very lucky that my mum, who is a socialist at heart, was the counterbalance to the capitalist in our house. I suppose the first and the influences early on, very much Gaelic football was probably like it was in every town. But one of the things that was established when I was in my kind of very young, like 8 or 9 years of age, established an athletic club. And that athletic club was really, I suppose, the first formative club that I was involved in. We did a lot of stuff. I did sprinting and long jump, but we traveled the country representing Ballyhonus and Mayo and Connacht, dependent on obviously what the items were, or the sports things were. We, I suppose, one of the influences, and I think you alluded to it earlier, a couple of those guys went on to sports scholarships in the States, and it was really interesting to see that evolution as a club. And I remember my mother setting up a going away party for a guy who you may know, a guy called Frank Greeley, who is a sports editor and ran a business called a magazine called The Irish Runner. And we remember having a going away event for him and a taxi coming to take him, to bring him up the road to Dublin Airport. And it was like the notion that a fellow from Ballyhonus, and he was 18, I was probably 11 or 12, and he getting into a car and going to the US. It was an incredible thing for the town. We were exceptionally proud of him. And the guy called Eddie Campbell subsequently went, and he did the hammer. And they were probably the two leading lights outside of all of the football heroes that obviously we all had, like a guy called Tom Fitzgerald, who played with Mayo in the 60s. I worked in his shop. A guy called JJ Criven, who was a priest from a well-known family in the town. And they were the kind of the early formative people. And a guy called Jim Higgins, in turn then, who was a local politician who went on to become an MEP. So we were very lucky with the role models we had, and very lucky that we had the family we had. So it was a very interesting period of time.
And Richard, just over to yourself, sport as well is something that's very close to you. And how was early life growing up in Newport, and obviously how big an influence with GA and others for you?
Thank you, Garrett, and thank you very much for the time. And thank you to Spot Recruitment as well. Yeah, look, growing up in Newport, it's a small town of roughly 800 people. Kind of everybody knows everyone. Initially we lived just out of town, and when I think I was 6, and we moved right into the center of the town in the main street. In terms of upbringing, and obviously the GA club was the cornerstone of the town. From the age I was just talking about it, my best friend at home, Liam O'Malley, his kid started training yesterday, and we were reminiscing about our first training session many moons ago yesterday on a chat. Playing with the club was a huge part of our upbringing, and we had great players. In the mid '90s, especially Colin McManaman, who was a local hero, still is a local hero in Newport. Unfortunately, I probably wasn't graced with the skills that Ted Webb has on the sporting field. It's certainly not Killian, but I loved every single minute of it, and it's still a huge GA is a huge passion, and Mayo GA in particular. But bringing it back to Newport and influences, our house was, as I said, on the main street. The front door was always open. My dad was a local councillor, went on to be a senator. So we always had people coming in. We had a farm, we had a B&B. We used to work the B&B during the summer, and I was the youngest of 4 siblings. So when I look at influences, really, it was definitely from my parents. First of all, work ethic is such an important factor it rolls down from one generation to the next, and it's very hard to substitute, no matter what line of business you're in. I think that my parents always worked hard, and they expected my siblings and myself to continue to lift the load, whether it was helping out in all the ventures, business ventures that we had, or working elsewhere and getting a summer job. And it's a great upbringing, and it's I think that the politics side was such a great learning curve at a young age, knocking on doors, meeting people, often listening to stuff that maybe after listening to criticism at a young age. It's a good training ground, as long as you how to decompartmentalize it. I think that it fine tunes, certainly fine tunes your social skills and how to read people. And then on the in terms of example set, being the youngest, you can be lucky. I see it with my kids now. I see that my youngest kid, he just kind of soaks up what the other people are doing. And I certainly, my siblings set a great example for me as well, in terms of education being a constant focus within the family, and making sure that you follow the footpath of in general doing the right thing and trying to give it your best in school.
We're going to speak, Richard and Ted, a little bit later about the importance of mentoring and the value of mentoring, and certainly something I think is undervalued in this country. How important was mentoring, Ted, to you, and in shaping your career decisions when you were moving into thinking of what you're going to do at college and had an eye on career?
I think Richard alluded to it there. Hugely important. I mean, I think when I thought about this, you mentioned it yesterday, I think in pretty much every facet of my life, particularly as you move job or country, there's always been, maybe it's a sponsor rather than a mentor. It's somebody who you connect with, and that's just an intangible. But if, as Richard alluded to, if you have, I worked in a bar at home, and you kind of figured out very quickly how to deal with, interesting customers and awkward customers, and over time you get to, I suppose, develop a sense of who you are. Although that, I'm still trying to figure that out myself, because obviously that's a heavy evolution. But as I think through mentors and sponsors, people who were looking out for you, multitudes of people, pretty much in every job I've had, in every entry point that I got into, they opened doors, they facilitated opening doors. But also what was interesting was the door was open, but then it's up to you to take that step in. And it was that piece that said, how do I give of my best in that short time? You've got to maybe impress somebody if it's an interview. If it's a longer period of time, i.e. you've just got the job and you're trying to figure out what it is. I know we could talk about this later about characteristics, but it's that capacity to be empathetic, hardworking. One of the thoughts in my head was, kind of a lifelong learner, observation, the skills of listening. We all struggle with that a little bit. It's your capacity just to observe your environment, bring your core values to that environment, and hopefully somebody spots that. And being Irish, certainly, I think Richard may feel this as well. I worked in London for 5-6 years. I worked in the States for a year. I worked in Canada for 5 years. And being Irish certainly helped. But it was up to you then to maybe bring that other attributes with it. But hugely important, I think, Garrett. And I always say to people who are going through whatever it is, and I hope I can fulfill that role with some people myself, because I just know that the career I've had has been very much facilitated by people who have your best interest at heart.
And Richard, we're going to talk about that Irish value, certainly in the UK and the US. But Richard, for you, being at even the level that you're at the moment, and that, when we spoke on the phone, that rapid rise in your career, where does mentoring and mentorship come for you at the moment, and the value of it?
It's hugely valuable. Like, I think that, as Ted said, throughout all the steps in your career, even through your summer jobs, there were different people who you learn from, and who I suppose to try and get the most out of mentoring is to try and take the best qualities of the people who you work for in different jobs and try and apply them to your own skill sets. In my role in Goldman, obviously you are mentoring a lot of people, but the higher up you go, oftentimes the more you seek mentorship as well, ironically. And you learn from mentoring down, and you learn from obviously getting mentored as well. It's really important to note that, like, you actually do learn bits about yourself, or you can apply certain situations to your current situation when you're helping other people. We're sociable beings. We want to communicate, and oftentimes, and it's especially prevalent around COVID. Oftentimes, mentorship is just listening sometimes, and mentorship is to be there and be a shoulder for somebody to lean on, and then you just kind of give small tweaks and give small bits of advice. But in the workplace, no matter where you're working, people are frustrated, and people just want to talk and be able to feel that they can discuss any misgivings they may have. I think what the great thing about coming from Ireland is and I won't, because I know you want to touch on it later on in life, but growing up in the West in particular is you work so many jobs, whether it's behind a bar, washing dishes, working in different areas, all these summer jobs. And I think that you realize that, you just get a great breadth of experience, and you realize there are great people in every single industry. And I think that's, I think coming to, I think that's a to have that realization is very important when even if you're trying to get into a job in a high street bank in finance or in an investment bank, etc. A lot of the same skill sets apply, and a lot of great people work in different industries. Like, to manage a kitchen in a busy restaurant is probably as stressful a job as trading macro rates. Sometimes when it's really, really busy. And I think sometimes it's really important to get that work experience. I think it's really important to sell that work experience, and when people are thinking about their jobs and look back, they should look back and try and pick and choose the learnings of those jobs, and try and apply them as they move forward into their new roles.
Yeah. I'm going to pull you up on that great example. You told me of your first, or your job interview with BNP, and you were swatting the research prior to the interview. You might tell people that story of how to properly brief for an interview, Richard.
Yeah, well, I think look, I think that everyone now, like the graduates, firstly, like everything is global now. Our competition is global. Like, you go to Dublin and you walk into any major, an American company, international company, they're coming from all countries, right? So when we're coming from UCG or we're coming from UCD, you're not in the graduates, in terms of competing for jobs, are not only competing with fellow Irish graduates, they're competing with international graduates. And the key is to try and differentiate yourself, and try and find a way to differentiate yourself. I was lucky enough when I was going through my third or fourth or fifth round of interviews at BNP. I Googled the guy who was interviewing me, and he ran short-term rates at BNP. And I found out that he worked for an Irish woman from Clare for 10 years, who had since retired. And I did an interview with him and 3 other people. And then I was walking out, and I said, "Oh, you know this person?" Yeah. And it goes, "Oh yeah, she lives in my area. She's well known in my area," which was kind of bending the truth, to be honest. But like, he had interviewed 7 people that day, or 8 people that day. And it was just to try and make some sort of connection. You can call it, you can call it cuteness, you can call it whatever you want, but you're just trying to find some formal advantage. And he looks, he's since been, he's a great friend of mine. He was at my wedding, etc. And he always mentions it, that the only reason he probably hired me, because everyone were very good candidates, was because I just made some sort of personal connection. So it helps.
Ted, you had a similar story yourself with KPMG.
Yeah, very analogous to what Richard's describing. It's one where there's a middle ground, and again, we talked about how you pick your careers. We kind of, in the end of your middle of your second year, the accounting firms come in and have discussions and try and pick out candidates they might want to go with. I was SKC as it was, KPMG now. They were just opening an office in Galway, and they were hiring 3 candidates, and I figured Galway was a good location to continue to try and build your career. And the guy who interviewed us was a guy called Bill Foley, who actually had an accounting firm in Kilkenny, of which SKC bought in as it happened. A gentleman, really, really nice man. And as part of the interview, I was kind of explaining who I was, what I was doing. But he had brought up that his daughter was an engineer, and she was on the oil rigs off Aberdeen in the North Sea. And we got into that discussion, and we spent 20 minutes talking about his daughter. But again, it showed that, again, I showed a level of interest because I was interested, but I also felt that, he was getting to know me a little bit around my possible social skills. And I think one of the things we will come to is, regardless of what profession you're in, pretty much we're in the sales game, and we have to sell ourselves. And however we differentiate ourselves, as Richard said, that's important. And you're also being true to yourself. I mean, that's kind of the bit that you've got to be authentic. I know it's an awful word, but it's a real word, and it is that piece to say, that ability to adapt to the environment is a key life skill.
Yeah. I want to move in now for a few minutes to talk on the business lessons that we can learn, and maybe begin with yourself, Ted, on, I suppose, how important vision is in an organization, and to have that really nailed down to ensure that everyone is on the one page.
Oh, look, it's crucial. I know, again, when we bought the business 3 years ago, obviously I've been part of that business for 20 years. It was very independent, but it was small. It was 20 plus people. So it has to be crucial. And I think the term vision, I'd interplay that with culture. It is all about the culture. And culture, that great term, culture eats strategy all day, every day. It is so true. But in turn, it does take time to figure out what that means. And I think culture is in a sense something that's embedded in an organization, and you have to live the values. I mean, again, they're easily spoken about, but probably difficult enough to try and ensure that you wear them every day. So hugely important. We worked with a guy who was really helpful for us to reshape that. We had the transition was one thing. We also had a generational issue. Myself and Tom, who were the guys who acquired the business, and subsequently now we've had additional shareholders. The age gap was a generation. So we were really trying to understand how we can transition what was this old world vision of an independent, to be fair, highly kind of regarded business that's now transitioning into a more nimble new world business of what used to be public companies is now entrepreneurial and pretty much, all tech-enabled type businesses. So it really was a shift in who we served, core skills acquired that were complementary or were still required. But it is that piece. How do you ensure that as you sell, because we are selling to our prospective employees, that we have a culture, we can define it, we live it, and hopefully our alumni and our staff, who ultimately are the recruiters, ultimately can give comfort that actually is there and is embedded. Richard,
if I look at leadership, and we often hear at the moment talk about transformational leadership post-COVID, and in many ways that the leaders that are going to emerge from the next 10 years are going to be people who have created or learned their skills on the job as opposed to out of a book. For you, Richard, what are the key components of that transformational leadership piece?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, I think any graduate starting their job, yes, they apply some of what they learned in college to their job, but it's pretty minimal. Like, I think a degree in general shows that you're disciplined, you're given tasks to do, and you can do those tasks within a time frame, and you can do them better than other people, and that's what results are for. I find like once you start on the job, you know, you're almost starting from scratch, and you learn by doing. You know, I think that as we move forward, you know, in my environment for sure, you know, leadership is transformational leadership, or leadership in general. I still believe in the basics that you try and lead by example. So, you know, there's nothing worse than having a boss where you feel is you know, half committed. So you have to show full commitment, and you try and build a culture of excellence, but also you build a culture of hard work ethic and expectation of work ethic. And I think when you get a group to work on that sort of, you know, on a similar hymn sheet, I think it can be a powerful thing. And I think it bonds the group together. I do think, you know, generations change, and, you know, we were talking, you know, before we went live on different generations, etc. There's completely new generations coming through now over the next 10 years who are not used to the same amount of potential social interaction, who prefer to communicate on chat, who you know, prefer to you know document everything in an email as opposed to a phone call. And I do think you know as we leaders in the next 10 years you know have to strike a balance on that. Like there is no, I still believe there is no substitution for the human touch, and there's no, when you're trying to lead a team, there's no substitution for one-to-one dialogue and communication in person. So I'm very much looking forward to people returning back to the office and such that we can all be together again. I think that the bottom line for me is, in terms of leadership, it's about setting the right tone and example, and that kind of filters down to the different levels within your team. And leading by example is still the key core as we look ahead for the next 10 years.
And how effective is that piece on communications? How important is that piece on communications in terms of being effective in the environment we're in now, where we're not all together, but equally bridging that gap from the email to the in-person, and how that again builds your character?
It's hugely important. It's hugely important in any walk of life. Like, there are neighbors in Mayo who haven't talked to each other for 30 years over 5 feet of road, because they haven't communicated either. Like, communication solves a lot of problems. Now, granted, it may not. Oftentimes, just getting somebody in the room and facing up to the confrontation is much better than letting it bottle up. And in terms of like setting the right tone and having the right, having a well-functioning workplace, I think it's really important to be forthright and really important to kind of nip things in the bud. So, that's certainly my belief. I think that it's not easy to do it. Like, certainly not in my nature to be confrontational. It's certainly not in my nature. Maybe it's a West of Ireland thing, but you tend to like bottle things up and deal with it on the inside. But it's certainly a new muscle that I've tried to exercise in the last 10 to 15 years, in terms of getting better at really like confronting an issue head on, whether it's with your boss, whether it's with a co-worker, whether it's with a client, as opposed to letting it fester. Because letting it fester over time has no real longevity in the form of growing.
Great. Ted, we just want to move into looking at the whole area of recruitment and executive development, and what for you, what do you look for? What values do you look for in people when you're recruiting?
Well, I think I get the first plug in here, Garrett. I mean, you hire somebody like Spot Recruitment. Look, it's an evolving piece. We were so again talking like Richard. Over the course of time, it has definitely developed. There was a time where you went and you hired yourself, or characteristics of yourself, or who you thought was yourself, and therefore that was the way people hired, and that's how we hired. One of the things and that's evolved, but one of the things that we always try to differentiate was your out of work activities. I mean, as Richard alluded to earlier, we were lucky in the sense that we attract pretty self-motivated individuals, and that therefore looks after, broadly speaking, maybe the result and the actual academics piece of it. But is that other extracurricular piece? What are they doing? How are they doing it? Is it a team? I mean, interesting, in our own organization, they've got some people who kind of quite like the singular pursuits. I'm much more in the team game, and it's the winning, the losing, the resilience associated with all of that. So that's a huge part of what we do. Now, one of the things we have changed in the last 2 years is, rather than having the recruitment from the top down, we're very much now kind of have evolved a process where it's from the middle up, where we bring on board the people who they actually will report into. They're the screening process, and they bring forward the number of people that maybe us as directors then would have a discussion around and see where we get to. So definitely something we've thought about. Again, we've made some mistakes, and it's painful when you make a mistake and somebody's on board and they're not going to make it for whatever reason. You potentially lose 2 years of a person's life. And go back to Rich's, notwithstanding all of the kind of employment law issues, you try and ensure you help them, you mentor them, you bring them forward. And if that's not working, you really have to have that honest discussion to say that it may just not be for you. So we need to get better. We're getting better at that. We're probably hiring a little bit younger and growing our own rather than maybe bringing people from that middle tier. So it's definitely one that we spend a lot of time thinking about, only because it's painful if you get it wrong at an emotional level and maybe at a financial level.
Richard, when we spoke a few days ago, you said that you probably interview on average 30 candidates every month, and you're a very senior level, obviously, in Goldman Sachs, and it's very much those sort of early moments in an interview where people have the opportunity to, number one, sell themselves. So we might talk a little bit about that Irish trump card that is very important. But equally, what values would you look for? Trust, fearlessness, those sort of elements.
Yeah, I don't have it down fully. Like I probably 30 is probably the number. It's probably a bit high, maybe a little less than that, but it's a lot. And for all my interviewing, I don't have a perfect strategy. A lot of the time, in general, some of these CVs are just so impressive. Super talented people, and then it's a question of how do I envisage this person to fit into the team, and then it's like instinct. Where do I think this person is going to go above and beyond and really work hard? And then in my game in trading, I tend to ask one or two questions where it's like, could you give an example where you took risk in your life? And it doesn't have to be financial risk. It could be just any general risk, whether it's like jumping on a boat and going somewhere, or whether it's flying and moving your life to a different country, etc. So there's no perfect strategy. When people, again, it's down to that 30-minute slot. I would say this as well. Like Ted probably has 12 to 13 Zooms on his calendar today. He's a very busy man. I would say, like, if you're getting 30 minutes of his time, note that generally people like Ted or who are interviewing are super busy, and like they're probably walking into a room with around 7 different things on their mind. Once they sit down, it's really important to get their attention, and it's really important to try and differentiate. And they're the two things. So try and drive the discussion a little more when you have, when you are in the interview, and really try and set the tone in a nice way, not in an overconfident way. And that's not easy to tread that needle, but that's the goal, I think.
and the Irish piece where we talked about, and certainly you had remarked that, you know, it certainly has helped you in getting your foot in the door. And I think you used the phrase that getting your foot in the door can be the hardest first move. You know, so is that it's the Irish personality, it's the warmness, it's the ability to talk. Is that what you're highlighting?
Look, I think in general Irish people are super personable. You know, maybe it's too much of a blanket statement, but I do think we stand out in terms of our personability. I think that in a workplace, especially in a large bank, you know, you start off as an analyst, and you're dependent on the people around you to pass on their craft to you and their skill sets to you. So how do you get that information passed on? Now, the boss will enforce it to an extent, but to really, to really learn quickly and to really become a team member, you know, you have to build those networks and build those relationships. And I think Irish people tend to do very, very well in that. Like, you know, there's a huge Irish contingent in New York and in London that have been super, super successful. So I would say the ratio of success versus analysts and graduates is very, very high. So do play to your strengths. And, you know, I think that, you know, common sense and a bit of, common sense in terms of when's there, you know, it's a lot easier to approach a person on a Friday afternoon at 2:00 as opposed to asking for help at 8 a.m. on a Monday when, you know, nobody likes Mondays. So that kind of stuff helps. And I think once the hard part again is getting in, and once you're in, then you can really, use the personal touch as much as you can to climb the ladder.
Ted, back to you, and change of topic and more current, let's say, in terms of the pandemic and the global economy, and we'll hear both of you talk about this. How do you view where we're at, Ted, in terms of the economy globally, but obviously your own views on our economy here, and what's your views on predictions on what we're going to see over the next while?
Garrett, you got to be careful now. You're talking to a salesman, so we start with everything is positive, and then the second, third sentence you get into the nuance. So I think, look, we're very confident. Genuinely, we've never been as busy, and it's a function of that is maybe the latency of what happened last year, where we have people who propose things, postponed events, or they just get elongated, or the kind of things that are driving things for us today. Notwithstanding, I think Brexit is as important as the pandemic. But what has occurred, particularly in entrepreneurial-led and family-owned type businesses, is that they've now identified for the first time, because they've slowed down, that pretty much all of their wealth is tied up in this particular corporate vehicle. And therefore, is that, from a risk assessment, is that right? You got a lot of multinationals who have let things swing, where they have branches or subsidiaries in Ireland, because we're pretty much Irish centric in the context of the companies we work with, who shouldn't be there, or are under-servicing, or are just, because they've now had a chance to look at it again, should we be there, or do we have the skills to be there, or should we be exiting? So, and then there are big family businesses who ultimately are looking to see where from here. So it's succession, it's fundraisings, it's geographies, it's product profiles. So we have, I suppose, spent a lot of time with larger companies identifying what they're going to do, because the one thing that's out there is money. Money ain't the issue. The issues are, businesses, the ambition, and really what's changed from when I joined IBI in the private company side is ambition. Ambition is exponential from where it was. 80% of our work was sell side. I'd say 50-60% is sell side today. The rest is getting in, potentially getting growth capital in place, and potentially exit at a point in time. So it's a broad question, but I think the Brexit situation, particularly, 30-40% of our acquirers are American, and it's for a reason. It tends to be client-based. Clients are dragging them here through FDI or whatever it might be. And it's obvious, the obvious ones that are working really heavily are TMT, healthcare, manufacturing. There are segments of the market clearly are in trouble. Retail obviously is one, hotel, leisure, but there's a real sense they can bounce back as long as they have the wherewithal to do that. And we're doing a bit of that as well, where we're trying to ensure that people have the building blocks and their communication lines with their funders are open. You'll always find the ones that can't and don't. So we're very positive, and go back to Spot. They've hired 3 people for us in the last 6 months. We've hired another 4 or 5 analysts. So we're building for the future, and we're confident about what might happen.
Great, Richard. We read about the surge in the U.S. economy, and we're hearing lots of predictions that this global surge will be a modern day repeat of the roaring 20s. What's your own assessment of the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, look, I think that we are in a unique place where, there is a lot of pent up demand. I think that central banks have been super accommodative. When you look at money supply in the US, it's tripled in the last 18 months. And we have a situation where, we're probably going, from a vaccine point of view, we're going to normalize by the end of, you would imagine end of Q2. Obviously, the US and being ahead of its European peers. So it's untold territory from the point of view of there is so much stimulus in the economy and so much pent up demand. So the question is, do we get euphoric in terms of, and do we actually, because we've gone through 10 to 15 years where we've had no real significant inflation. And the question now is, with money supply so high, will we actually see that inflation pass through to the economy? And what's been very interesting in the last 2 months is the administration change in the US, where they've been extremely active in terms of trying to tackle income inequality in the US to the extent where they're passing stimulus checks to lower income people. So it's going to be super, super interesting. I think that roaring 20s, perhaps. I think that certainly we're in line for some huge economic growth in the next I would say 6 quarters. And I think that from a capital and Ted probably sees it better than I do, but in terms of like the capital acquisition, M&A activity, companies buying other companies, people are looking to deploy assets and deploy their cash at the moment. So I think we will see a huge amount of consumption in the next 6 weeks. We were just talking about New York as when you take the data points and bring it to real life, like New York feels like it's about to explode from the point of view of retail consumption, going to restaurants. So I think we're going to have some huge high growth quarters in the near term horizon.
Yeah, picking up on that point of Richard of the growth over the next 6 quarters. I suppose the question is what happens in the 8th quarter and the 10th quarter, and really what we may need to put in place to ensure we can weather the real economic challenges that may be lying down the road. Yeah, look,
that's for another day. Genuinely, how this plays out is kind of interesting. So money isn't the problem. Opportunities are a problem. Stock market is at all-time highs. Got a hiccup last year. It's back up above and beyond. But people are looking for yield, and therefore, if you can't get yield, you got to find it, and that's driving it. So, are there going to be corrections? I believe there will be. We see it now. The value expectation around companies is enormous, but we're we don't determine what the market believes. We follow the market. So I think there are certain, but there are some. It depends on what silo of the sector you're in. So some of them are seriously underrated relative to value. Some of the tech-enabled technology stocks are exponentially higher, and where all that goes long term will be interesting. And it does have a bearing in Ireland because of the influence it has in Ireland and its corporate tax rates, particularly with the FDIs. So we think we run what we have. I think you hope then that responsible government central banks can manage the level of issues that potentially come down the track. But it's a valuation issue as opposed to, I think, anything else.
We're going to finish up at 1:45, so we've another 10 minutes. I know Killian has a number of questions. So for the last part, it's really to get some lessons and life lessons or business lessons that both of you have learned over time, and back to my Steve Jobs quote of helping to join those dots. So Richard, you're very much on a high level position in New York, and I'm very much a big believer in having that balance in your life. How do you switch off and maintain that life balance?
Balance is key. Sometimes it's hard to be disciplined to maintain that balance. Look at I think I would say for me it's about sport is a huge part of my pastime, whether it's just going to the gym. We've a Peloton with COVID, we use that, but like watching sport, following sport. Mayo football is for my sins is a huge passion of mine. Not for my sins, it's such a in terms of following the team and in terms of taking your lazy thought process, it's a huge part. But it's really important to switch off, and it's really important to have that time with friends, and to have whether it's a couple of beers with your mates, or going out for a nice dinner with your wife and friends. It's really important. It's a really important part of my life. As I said, in my house the front door was always open, so I naturally like to meet up with friends when I'm not working, or play a bit of golf, or just have tried to find social occasions and just kind of shoot the breeze. But again, with one thing I did, and I will bring up with COVID, that it's been, when everyone's working from home, it has been hard for people to switch off, and it's been something that I've certainly tried to instill it within the teams to make sure that they allocate the right amount of time for themselves, whether it's to go to the gym or whether it's to call their family, etc. Because you're so close to your workstation, people tend to be working longer hours, we've found, and we continue to make sure that they strike a balance. But yeah, I would love to have more of a balance and work less. But it's in your spare time, it's just about maximizing your spare time as much as you can. And often, the last thing I would say is in terms of the balance, sometimes you feel that if you don't have things organized in your downtime, you almost feel like, oh, well, I should have, my wife always gives out to me about this, where it's like, maybe I should have planned better, or maybe, we should be doing this instead of just doing nothing. It's okay to do nothing. It's okay to chill out. It's okay to watch 2 or 3 shows on Netflix, to just give your mind a break and give your body a break. And you don't have to be going 90 miles an hour. We're so engaged with our phones. We're contactable on social media. We've 10 modes of contact. And sometimes it's really important to just completely switch off, and whatever tickles your fancy, you just do it.
Ted, resilience is again something we see time and time again in sport, definitely with Mayo GA, but resilience in business terms. For you, are there lessons or a moment in your career where a tough lesson was learned and you thought, that really defined my future.
Yeah, I'd say there were a number. I think off the top of my head, thinking about it, there was a couple where I had a particular boss, Richard Keating, unfortunately was passed away, who was fantastic. But he had this ethos, which was you've got a time slot to figure out what you're asking. You know, and Irish people, particularly West of Irish people, I was a rambler. It took me about 5 minutes to get out what he wanted out in 30 seconds. So that was the succinctness of obviously what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve. And the other bit that he had, which I really brought, I hope I brought with my career, is that if there's a problem, own up. If there's an issue, own up. If you've made a balls up or something, own up. Put the hand up. His philosophy was, how do we fix it? If we have to revisit it, well, we'll do that in time. But let's figure out how move this forward. Now, if you're having that same issue numerous occasions, well, probably there's a more fundamental issue. But it is that piece which says, and that goes back to that trust piece, the culture piece, to say we are servicing customers, clients, and it is key that we get that bit right. And trying to hide stuff or trying to blag away stuff, you'll be caught. And that's not good for your business, or it's not good for you personally, and it's not a good characteristic. So that's one of the things I did bring with me, was that fess up early. It always tends to have a better outcome.
So for me, lads, I'm just going to wrap up with one question to both of you, and I'll hand over then to Cillian.
Sorry, Garrett, not to cut across you, but I think Richard is very tight for time, so we might move to the Q&A if that's
okay.
That's
Perfect.
okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, Richard, if you need to jump, there's no problem. I'm just going to ask one question that came in yesterday.
Sure.
I want to thank you for your time, first of all, Richard. I know it's been a fascinating discussion for everybody that's here today. So I've been scrambling, taking down notes for the last 15 minutes and taking down everything. So if you need to jump, I know the life of an investment banker in New York is not one for a slow pace. So thanks for your time. And if I'm going to proceed with the question that came in last night.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for your time. Unfortunately, it's 8:40 in the morning here, and the markets are kicking off, and but it's been an absolute pleasure to spend time with everyone and see everyone, and well done to Spot Recruitment for organising such a unique and successful event, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Richard.
much appreciated.
Just one question that came in yesterday, as I mentioned, Ted, if you don't mind me putting it across. It was just around the future of work and some trends that both Dave and I have seen recently as well in certain sectors. Just that shift from the more permanent traditional hiring model towards maybe a more freelance and flexible hiring on a contract basis that maybe lends itself to the remote working possibilities that we now have and the technology that permits it. But I know you both referenced that personal connection and the importance of it, and the culture and the values of a company. Your story with Bill Foley and the oil rigs, and Richard in his interview, and that personal connection piece. What are your thoughts on that? And do you see that working in certain sectors? I know niche areas like investment banking may not be as suitable. So I'm fascinated to know your thoughts.
Yeah, so we see a lot of it. So first of all, it wouldn't work in investment banking. It just doesn't, because you got to build it. So how you succeed in our game, unfortunately, is you got to create fees, and ultimately that's a function of your network, your relationships, and that takes time. But that's the evolution, and that's how we do it, and that's about being part of something, being embedded in something, and you build your book. But at the companies we see, so you look at all of the tech-enabled businesses, particularly the IT services, like there is a culture there now where people, are effectively freelance, and they're off the books. They're their own corporations or companies. And that's just a function of their capacity to jump from job to job, but also their capacity to maybe work with 2 or 3 different groupings, because they're a sole entity. So in the more solitary situations where you can work from home and there isn't a requirement for heavy interaction, absolutely works, and it's successfully working. Where the challenges lie is the deeper you go, where relationships matter, and ultimately that's where you're marked on. That doesn't work. It just wouldn't work for us.
And Ted, just one final question that, if you don't mind, we'll wrap after this, that came in around leadership styles. So I know you mentioned the importance of molding staff in your own way and training them up that way. That suits your business. And the question that came in was around hands-on versus a hands-off approach. So just to expand on it, what, in your own experience, coming up through the ranks and now as a manager of people, do you find the most effective? Is it that the given autonomy to the staff member to achieve the desired results in their own way and trust them and empower them fully, or do you find it's more effective sometimes to hold their hand, to train them in quite closely with close contact and targets and that way?
Well, I better give you the honest answer in case any of the guys at our place see this video. Absolutely, I'm a believer in the deep end of the pool. That's how you learn. Now, that's clearly, again, the osmosis, because obviously there is a network of guys who obviously talk to each other, compare jobs, and they work through. You know, my philosophy is obviously you don't want to put people into positions where it could damage a relationship or they feel uncomfortable with. But in the main, once you figure out, we work in teams of 2, 3, or 4 or 5, depending on what that job might look like. But let's say a position where it's 2, you really got to make sure you stay close to it. It may be a personal relationship, and then you're hoping that that person comes to you on a continuous basis. But if it's 2, 3, or 4, and I'm 4 as the top, I've kind of won the work. I'll mind the relationship, guys. You figure it out, and that's the best way that's really the way we work. So I'm a real believer in you learn from scrambling within tight time frame or within 3 minutes. There are people who are much more anally retentive and who do need to feel that they need to control every facet of the job. That's a disaster for us because we overservice, we think about it too much. A lot of what we do is intuitive, and therefore you gotta hone that skill rather than be too prescriptive.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm just conscious of the time there now as well. I know, Ted, you've got a busy, very schedule, as Garrett. I suppose just to close from Spot Recruitment, and on behalf of David and I, Ted, Garrett, I want to sincerely thank you for your time. I think I'm not alone when I say I took an awful lot from that. A lot of nuggets that are applicable in sport for me, I'm thinking, and also in business for Dave and I in Spot Recruitment. We have a lot to live up to for the second installment of our On the Spot series, but moving forward with Garrett and our next guest in 3 to 4 weeks, we really hope that everybody will enjoy that one, and you'll see it advertised across our socials and our website in the coming weeks. For all the attendees, thank you for your time and support. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, and hopefully you'll be able to join us again, as I said, in a couple of weeks' time.
Great. Thanks, Killian. Thanks, David. Thanks, Garrett. Good to see you.
Thanks a million, guys. And just echo Killian's comments. Thanks again, Ted and Garrett. Pleasure to be with you today. So we're looking forward to the next installment as well.
Brilliant. Thanks again. Thanks, Garrett.
Thanks, guys.